This is the moment the Western world stopped pretending. Right now, as you are watching this, 7 of the most powerful leaders on Earth are sitting inside a sealed conference hall in Rome, Italy, and the conversation happening behind those closed doors is unlike anything this summit has ever produced. Because for the first time in the history of the G7, the agenda is not how to contain China. The agenda is how to survive in a world that China already controls. The man who forced that agenda was not invited. He never needed to be. Xi Jinping is sitting in Beijing tonight, and the leaders of the United States, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, Italy, Japan, and Canada are at this very moment reading a document that his government helped make inevitable. As of 6:47 in the morning, Thursday, June 12, 2026, a confidential G7 strategic assessment, 52 pages long, was leaked to the Financial Times, Reuters, and Der Spiegel simultaneously. And by the time the markets opened in London, the word leaked had already become the most dangerous word in world politics. In this breakdown, we are going to go deep. We are going to look at exactly what that document reveals, what the G7 leaders are privately saying to each other right now, and why the decisions made in Rome over the next 72 hours will determine who runs the global economy for the next generation. Because the story being told on every major network right now is not the full story. The full story is colder, more serious, and more consequential than anything they are willing to say out loud. China does not just lead in one area. China leads in everything that matters, and the G7 just admitted it. Stay with me, because what comes next is going to change how you see the world. This did not happen overnight, and the tragedy of this moment is that the warnings were always there. Go back to 2015. That was the year China announced its Made in China 2025 plan. The goal was bold and specific: dominate global production in 10 critical industries: electric vehicles, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, aerospace, robotics, clean energy, biopharmaceuticals, and advanced maritime equipment. Western governments read that plan. Economists warned about it. Think tanks published reports on it. And then almost everyone went back to buying cheap Chinese goods and telling themselves it would never actually work. The plan was not supposed to succeed this fast. China was supposed to get disrupted. The trade wars were supposed to slow it down. The chip export bans were supposed to cripple it. But here is what they missed. And this is the piece that nobody wants to say clearly. While American politicians were holding hearings about social media apps, China was quietly building the world's largest network of battery manufacturing plants. While Washington was debating how to subsidize electric vehicles, Chinese automakers were already selling more EVs than the entire rest of the world combined. And while Brussels was publishing lengthy regulatory documents, Chinese engineers were filing more artificial intelligence patents per year than the United States, Germany, and Japan put together. By 2024, China was responsible for 31% of all global manufacturing output. That was more than the United States and Germany combined. But nobody wanted to put that number on a front page because it was too uncomfortable to sit with. Then 2025 arrived. China's CATL, a single battery company from Fujian province, produced enough battery cells that year to power every new electric vehicle sold anywhere on Earth. One company, 1 year. The world's entire EV supply, running through one Chinese firm, and the raw materials feeding that company were processed through Chinese refineries at a rate no Western nation can currently match or replace. By early 2026, China's share of global solar panel production had reached 87%. Their share of lithium battery production was at 76%. Their share of rare earth processing, the minerals inside every smartphone, every military guidance system, and every clean energy device on the planet, had reached 91%. Nobody stopped it, Administration after administration, Republican, Democrat, Conservative, Labor. Speeches were given, summits were held, strategies were announced, and the dependency kept growing because the dependency was profitable. And profit, as it turned out, was always more persuasive than national security. Now, the bill has arrived. At 6:47 on the morning of Thursday, June 12, 2026, the first headline broke. The Financial Times published it first. 52 pages of classified economic and strategic analysis prepared directly for the G7 leaders now gathering in Rome. And the conclusion of that document, written not by Beijing's state media, not by Chinese government economists, but by the intelligence and economic teams of the G7 nations themselves, was this. China now leads the world in manufacturing output, clean energy production, electric vehicle sales, artificial intelligence patent filings, 5G infrastructure deployment, and rare earth processing capacity. In 5 out of the 6 core metrics the G7 uses to measure global economic leadership, China ranks first. Pause. The 7 richest democracies on Earth commissioned a secret report to measure who leads the global economy, and the report told them they were losing by a significant margin across nearly every category that defines modern industrial power. But the story does not stop there, because while that bombshell was spreading across every screen on Earth, something else was happening at that exact same moment. The Shanghai Composite rose 2.3% in the first hour of Asian trading on Thursday morning, not because of good domestic data, but because traders in Shanghai understood immediately what Western governments were only now being forced to admit out loud. Strength that was always real had just become impossible to deny. And while Asian markets were moving upward, defense ministries across Europe were receiving emergency classified briefings, because buried inside that 52-page document on page 34 was a detail that almost no one has covered yet. China's shipbuilding output in 2025 was 5 times larger than the combined output of all G7 nations. 5 times. The United States Navy today has fewer combat-ready vessels than it had in 2010. China's Navy added more new ships last year alone than the entire current operational fleet of France and the United Kingdom combined. That is not just an economic statistic, that is a military fact. And those two stories, the industrial reality and the military consequence, were arriving simultaneously in the same headlines, in the same emergency briefings, to leaders who were already on planes to Rome. According to sources inside the summit preparation process, the mood among delegations arriving in Rome on Wednesday evening was unlike anything senior diplomatic staff had witnessed in years. 3 officials, speaking on condition of anonymity to a European outlet, described the atmosphere as controlled panic. One G7 staff member, a veteran of 4 previous summits, used a single word to describe it: reckoning. An emergency session was convened at 9 p.m. Rome time on Wednesday night. The participants, national security advisors, and chief economic representatives from all 7 member nations. The topic, as one source described it, was blunt. What do we say in public when the private assessment is this damaging? Sources in Berlin say the German delegation arrived deeply conflicted. Germany's automotive industry, the backbone of Europe's largest economy, is fighting for survival against Chinese electric vehicles that are cheaper, better equipped, and increasingly preferred by European consumers. Volkswagen, BMW, and Mercedes are all in internal crisis discussions. If Berlin pushes back hard against China at this summit, Chinese buyers could vanish from German showrooms within a year. If Berlin says nothing, those showrooms empty anyway, because Chinese automakers will take the market regardless. Either way, Germany is in trouble, and Berlin knows it. The French delegation, sources say, arrived with a different calculation. Macron is attempting to use this summit to position France and Europe as the necessary negotiators between Washington and Beijing. If he can frame the G7 not as a confrontation with China, but as a structured engagement with China, he walks out a statesman. But if the confrontation framing wins, France loses its preferred role, and Macron returns to a domestic political environment that has not been kind to him lately. The American delegation carries the heaviest weight in that hall. Every other leader is watching Washington for a single signal, not a speech, not a press release, a signal that says Washington is actually ready to act. Because if the United States does not lead a serious response, there is no serious response. And the question that hung over the American team on Wednesday night, according to sources close to the delegation, was one they did not yet have and two. What is the American response when the problem is no longer that China might surpass you? What do you say to your allies and your voters when a 52-page document prepared by your own government says they already have? Follow the incentives. That is always where the real story lives. China did not become the world's dominant manufacturer by accident or by breaking the rules alone. It did it by building a system that Western economies made more and more rational to participate in. Every time an American company moved production to China to cut costs, it was a reasonable decision made by reasonable people. Every time a European government bought Chinese solar panels because they were 40% cheaper than domestic alternatives, it was a sensible budget call that made sense in the moment. The problem is that 1,000 individually rational decisions made by 1,000 different companies and governments created a collective dependency that nobody planned and nobody now knows how to unwind. This is what historians will eventually call the great miscalculation of the early 21st century. Not a war, not a single catastrophic policy failure. 1,000 quiet surrenders made in the name of efficiency and quarterly earnings. And Xi Jinping was patient, remarkably, deliberately, strategically patient. While American presidents cycled through 1 or 2 terms, he stayed. While European governments collapsed on budget crises and election results, he pursued decade-long industrial targets. The Made in China 2025 plan was not a boast at a press conference. It was a schedule, and China kept to the schedule while the Western world kept assuming it would miss it. The power shift that 52-page document confirms is not military conquest. It is not political overthrow. It is quieter than either of those things, and in some ways more permanent. Because what China now controls is the physical foundation of modern life. The batteries, the panels, the ships that move global trade, the minerals that run global defense. These are not things you replace in a quarter or a fiscal year. They take decades to build. And while the G7 begins that rebuilding conversation in Rome this week, China already holds a decade's head start. Here is what the next 72 hours actually look like, and this is the part that matters most. If the G7 responds to this moment with genuine commitment, real capital, real industrial policy, real willingness to sacrifice short-term profit for long-term economic sovereignty, then, in 10 to 15 years, the picture begins to shift. Pain now for security later. That is the argument being made inside those walls. But if the G7 walks out of Rome with a strong-sounding statement and no binding plan, Beijing will register that immediately. And every nation currently deciding whether to align more closely with the Western economic model or the Chinese economic model will make their choice based on what they see coming out of Rome this week. While the summit is happening inside those walls, the reaction outside is already writing the story. While G7 leaders are debating language and strategy, 43 developing nations currently inside China's Belt and Road Network are watching Rome carefully. Most of them have already accepted Chinese infrastructure, Chinese financing, Chinese technology. If Rome produces nothing actionable, those choices lock in permanently. And while diplomats are crafting sentences about supply chain resilience and strategic autonomy, the markets are doing what they always do, voting in real time. Australian rare earth mining stocks surged 4.1% on Thursday morning. American semiconductor equipment companies gained 3.7%. Investors are pricing in the possibility that this summit might finally produce real action. But investors have priced in G7 action before. They were wrong in 2018. They were wrong in 2021. They were wrong in 2023. Reports from inside the summit, sourced through 3 European diplomatic correspondents, describe the American delegation operating under pressure that is becoming visible. Staff are watching the principal closely. Decisions that normally take hours are taking longer, and the pressure is not just coming from the allies in that room. It is coming from the document on the table, which does not leave room for optimistic interpretation. The leaked document is not just data, it is a symbol. And symbols, in moments like this, carry more weight than statistics ever could. That 52-page assessment represents something that Western governments have spent a decade refusing to say publicly, that the strategy of containing China's rise through tariffs, export controls, and diplomatic isolation has failed. That the core assumption driving that strategy, that China needed Western technology and Western markets more than the West needed China, was wrong. Not slightly wrong. Fundamentally, consequentially, expensively wrong. You can spin a trade deficit. You cannot spin a confidential document that 7 governments wrote about themselves. And here is where we actually stand tonight. The G7 leaders are in Rome. They are meeting, they are talking. And sometime in the next 48 hours, they will stand in front of cameras and deliver a statement about strategic competition, industrial investment, and a coordinated path forward. The statement will be serious in tone and careful in commitment. And then they will board their planes and fly home. And Beijing will read that statement word by word. And Beijing will measure what is actually behind it. And if what is behind it is the same thing that was behind every G7 statement for the past decade, which is intent without deadline, language without money, and consensus without consequence, then Xi Jinping will understand that the window of Western response has not opened. It has simply been spotted again and closed again. Expect China to move quietly in parallel this week. Beijing will accelerate its engagement across Africa and Southeast Asia. It will deepen financing commitments to countries still sitting on the fence. It will make new industrial partnership offers to nations the G7 has spent years trying to court. It will do what it has always done, which is play the long game while the West debates the vocabulary of the short one. But here is what cannot be walked back. The document is public. The private admission is now part of the historical record. The G7 can no longer claim to their own citizens or to each other that they did not know where things stood. And that, in a strange way, is the most consequential thing to happen at a G7 summit in a decade. Not a decision, not a policy, not a deal. The end of a very expensive illusion. Tonight, in Rome, the lights inside the summit hall are still burning. Staff are moving between rooms, translators are working into the early hours, and somewhere in that building, a leader is sitting alone with the 52 pages open in front of them, reading the same conclusions for the 3rd time, trying to find a sentence that changes what it says. There is no such sentence. The world they promised to protect has been quietly, systematically, and legally reorganized. And the country that reorganized it is not angry, not threatening, not standing at a border with weapons raised. It is simply ahead, building, producing, waiting. If 7 of the richest democracies on earth, with every resource and every warning and every year of preparation behind them, could not prevent this moment, what does that say about who really builds the modern world? Think about that. Really think about it. Because the answer is not comfortable, and it does not arrive easily. I will be tracking every development coming out of this Rome summit across the next 72 hours. Every statement, every side conversation, every signal from Beijing. If something significant breaks before this summit closes, I will cover it the moment it happens. Because this story is not settled. Not close to settled. Subscribe. Stay close. The most important chapter of this story is still being written, tonight, in Rome, right now.